The Paris Principles for national human rights institutions are the single most important foundational document. They establish the international basis for national human rights institutions. They're not maximum standards or aspirational standards, things we should aim to do, but they establish the bare minimum of what is necessary for a national human rights institution to be effective in its work.
There really are half a dozen key elements in the Paris Principles. The first is that a national human rights institution must be independent. So national institutions must demonstrate that they are independent both of the executive government and of other elements in society, and sometimes that independence is problematic. And I guess the best way I could describe it is that national institutions which relied on funding from the government have to balance between what is often an advisory role to government, but sometimes need to be an adversarial role.
And so a number of components of the Paris Principles address this important issue of independence. To promote the independence of the institution, it must be established by constitution or a law. It must have independent members. They must be selected according to externally known criteria and an appropriate appointment process that ensures the suitability of those who are appointed. And they should be appointed for a term and not be capable of being dismissed except for the most serious reasons like criminal convictions.
The element of accessibility is extremely important. It's not highlighted in the principles, but the whole point about a national human rights institution is that it must be accessible to people in society who may not necessarily have access to the courts or who might find the courts intimidating.
The requirement of pluralism is an important requirement so that the institution reflects the broader composition of the society.
Well, we're required, in fact, by the Paris Principles to have regard to pluralism, but of course you can't go very far in a small office. So, but with our National Advisory Council of Human Rights, we have endeavored to meet the need to be pluralistic. We have all sorts of people in there. We've got professionals like doctors, lawyers, people with disabilities. We've got religious community. I've reserved a place for the Fa'afafine Association. Gender equality in Samoa is not just about male and females. There's also a third group, which we just commonly label as or name as Fa'afafine.
But pluralism is also about a way of working. It's about the way in which we approach our job and how we relate to the broader community. By ensuring through our projects, our collaboration with civil society, advisory committees of one kind or another, that the Commission or the institution is open to the wide diversity of views amongst the various social groups. Other kinds of criteria in the Paris Principles are broad functions, broad powers, enough to carry out the functions, adequate resources, commensurate in one way or another with the resources available in the country as a whole.
Now, the final point I would make, I guess, goes back to the very essence of the big argument we had in Paris, and that is that national human rights institutions must be able to promote and protect human rights.
So I think the Paris Principles are as relevant today as they were almost 25 years ago when they were first developed. And the reason I say that is because they are broad principles. And so it isn't specific and now time dated. And instead what we've done is developed general observations. And they're intended to be an interpretation of the broad principles. The general observations are helpful both for the subcommittee in interpreting the Paris Principles and determining compliance with them. It's also helpful for the national human rights institutions to see what it is we're going to be looking at, and it's also helpful for states because they can see when we say you need to amend the legislation to provide for this, they will then see what is it that needs to be done.
They're fairly general in many ways, the Paris Principles. It's up to individual countries to determine appropriately for its own legal system what the most important structure for the Commission might be.
And so basically I think we have to form our act may not be as perfect as others, but at the end of the day, I think the group, our peer group in the ICC, the re-accreditation group, will look at your performance. But we have to make progress. So this gives us, the sense of challenge and what I call expectation, to deliver.